close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let your thoughts drift back through centuries of dust and memory, to a place where empires rose and fell, and where the pulse of 1,000 lives once echoed against ancient stone. In the heart of modern Rome, among traffic and tourists, stands a monument of time, the Colosseum, or as the ancients called it, the Amphitheatrum Flavium, a circle of arches and shadows that has stood for nearly 2,000 years, witnessing triumph, terror, celebration, and silence. Built for spectacle, but destined for eternity, the Colosseum was more than an arena. It was the beating heart of imperial life, a place where emperors asserted their power, citizens lost themselves in glory and blood, and history unfolded with every cry and clash beneath the Roman sun. And though the sands of its arena are long swept away, and the roar of the crowd silenced by time, the Colosseum endures, not just as stone, but as symbol, as ghost, as echo. Tonight, we journey through its creation, its height, its fall, and its afterlife. Let the noise of the world fade, let the city around you quiet, and step with me into the corridors of memory, into a world where every stone tells a story, and every arch opens into the soul of Rome. Before the Colosseum, before the roar of the crowds and the clash of steel, there was the Roman Forum, the Palatine Hill, the sacred temples and bustling streets of a city that had grown from humble myth into imperial majesty. By the 1st century CE, Rome was the largest city the world had ever known, its streets crowded with merchants and senators, poets and beggars, soldiers and slaves. It was a place of contradiction, grandeur and squalor, order and chaos, gods and emperors. And yet, in all its splendor, Rome lacked one thing, an amphitheater worthy of its name. In the heart of the city, in a place once claimed by tyranny and decadence, would rise the most enduring structure of the ancient world. The Colosseum was not merely a building, it was a declaration of control, of spectacle, of identity. It would gather 50,000 souls beneath a canopy of sun and blood, and reflect back to them the vastness of their empire. It would become the soul of the city, pulsing with triumph and terror for centuries to come. The story of the Colosseum's birth begins not in celebration, but in shame. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, the Emperor Nero took vast swaths of land for himself, building a decadent palace, the Domus Aurea, complete with man-made lakes, gilded halls, and gardens lush enough to rival Eden. The people murmured, angry and weary of extravagance, while they rebuilt their homes. And when Nero fell, the Flavian dynasty rose, determined to cleanse the empire of his excess. Vespasian would dig and build, creating a massive amphitheater in its place. Free entry, public joy, and games that honored the gods and the Roman state. It was more than a gift, it was a political stroke of genius, rewriting memory with marble, and giving spectacle to soothe the masses. Begun in 72 CE and completed under his son Titus 8 years later, the Colosseum became a monument not just of engineering, but of redemption, a new dynasty's promise in stone. Rising from the ashes of the old, to build the Colosseum was to challenge the very limits of Roman engineering and to triumph over them. Rising to a height of nearly 50 meters, stretching over 180 meters across, and shaped in a perfect oval for sound, sight, and structure, it was a masterpiece of design. 4 tiers of seating arranged by class, 80 numbered entrances to manage thousands of visitors, vomitoria that allowed the arena to empty in minutes. Every detail honed to function, form, and awe. Its outer walls were crafted with travertine stone, held together not with mortar, but with iron clamps, while the core layers used concrete, a Roman innovation that allowed them to defy the old boundaries of weight and scale. Arches supported arches, vaults lifted walls into the sky, and beneath it all, a vast skeleton of labor toiled night and day to bring it to life. The Colosseum was not just built, it was sculpted, designed by minds who understood pressure, motion, rhythm, and when it was finished, it stood not only as a gift to the people, but as a demonstration of Rome's mastery of both art and order, a colossal circle of power, born from geometry and will. Behind every arch, every perfect curve, every seated tier of the Colosseum lies a human story of toil, of sweat, of hands worn raw by rope and stone. The materials came from across the empire, travertine from Tivoli, truffa from nearby quarries, bricks and marble from Lazio, and timber from the forests of Umbria. Thousands of slaves, prisoners of war, and hired laborers worked under the sun and lash to cut, transport, lift, and fit every piece. Engineers marked angles in chalk, while workers hoisted stones with pulleys and ramps. Every piece was shaped not only by tool, but by planning. Mathematical precision turned into physical harmony. Beneath the arena would eventually grow the hypogeum, the underground chambers that made the Colosseum more than stone. It became a machine of illusion and movement, a stage both above and below. And though the names of those who built it are mostly lost, their work endures, still holding sky and silence after 2 millennia. To build the Colosseum was not merely a feat of power, it was an act of imagination, a dream given shape through patience, sweat, and monumental skill. Beneath the bright glare of the Roman sun, under the shouts of 50,000 throats and the clash of bloodied iron, there lay a secret world, dark, silent, and alive with hidden motion, the hypogeum, the underground heart of the Colosseum. It was not part of the original construction, but added later under Emperor Domitian, a labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, pulleys, and trapdoors that turned the arena above into a living stage. Here, animals were caged in gloom. Gladiators waited in prayer or silence. Slaves moved like shadows hauling props, while engineers managed lifts powered by men walking in massive wheels. A lion could rise from the earth as if summoned by magic, or a forest of trees might bloom from the sand for a mythological scene, all controlled from below, in the flicker of torchlight and the scent of damp stone. The hypogeum was a theater beneath the theater, where illusion was born and dread ripened in waiting. The audience never saw this world, but they felt its presence with every surprise, every rising door, every beast that appeared from nowhere. It was innovation turned to spectacle, a triumph of engineering that fed the hunger for awe. And even now, when tourists walk above those ancient stones, the air below still holds a chill, as if the ghosts of what once was still linger beneath the stage. They were icons of brutality and honor, slaves and stars, men who lived and died for moments of fame, the gladiators, warriors of the Colosseum. Not all were prisoners or captives. Some volunteered, seeking glory, gold, or escape from obscurity. But most were bound by chains, trained in special schools called ludi, where discipline was ruthless and failure meant death. They trained with wooden swords, learned footwork, endurance, combat techniques, and the roles they would play in the deadly theater. The heavily armored Murmillo. Friendships were rare, rivalry common, but respect forged in sweat and scars. On the day of the games, they were paraded through the streets in vibrant tunics saluting the emperor with the words, Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you. They fought, not in chaos, but in choreographed fury, for the crowd demanded skill, courage, and spectacle. Sometimes a match ended in mercy, other times in blood, decided by the thumb of an emperor or the roar of the people. Those who won repeatedly became legends, their names whispered in markets and carved on walls. Yet for most, their fame was brief, their freedom uncertain, and their death as sudden as the strike of a gladius. They were men turned myth, symbols of Roman values, strength, sacrifice, and spectacle, etched forever in the dust and memory of the Colosseum. One day, all things were done, and doubt, worry, and rivalry was part of the battle. There were no prizes for the victors, queens, and for all, but failed the conqueror, revenge or not mention. From the far corners of the Roman world, they came, lions from Africa, tigers from the east, bears from the Alps, elephants, crocodiles, leopards, ostriches, and more, gathered not for study or wonder, but for slaughter, for drama, for the grand spectacle of the Venetians, the animal hunts. The Colosseum was not just a place for men, it was a theater of nature turned violent, where the wildest creatures were pitted against each other, or brave hunters, known as bestiari. No expense was spared. Forests were recreated with painted scenery. Traps were hidden beneath sand, and the audience gasped as a rhino burst through painted gates or a leopard leapt from a hidden cage. Sometimes the animals fought each other, driven mad with hunger and noise. Other times, condemned criminals were thrown into the arena, weaponless, torn apart as punishment and warning. These games celebrated Rome's mastery over nature, its power to bring the world's wonders into its heart and control them. These games celebrated Rome's mastery over nature, its power to bring the world's wonders into its heart and control them. But they also spoke to a darker hunger for dominance, for chaos tamed, for the thrill of watching death from a safe seat. Historians say tens of thousands of animals died in the first 100 days of the Colosseum's opening alone. And though those cries have long since vanished, the air still remembers the smell of fur, the spray of blood, and the heavy silence that followed the final roar. Not all who entered the Colosseum did so for sport or glory. Some came only to die. For the Romans, public execution was not merely punishment, it was ritual, lesson, and entertainment. Condemned criminals, traitors, and slaves were marched into the arena, their crimes announced, their fate sealed, not by trial, but by performance. A man who betrayed Rome might be cast as Orpheus, torn by wild animals. A woman found guilty of treason might be bound in costume and sacrificed as Iphigenia. Others were forced to fight one another with no training, condemned to die as blood offerings to justice. The audience, desensitized yet expectant, cheered or turned away depending on the drama. It was Rome's way of enforcing order, public, brutal, unforgettable. And in a world where honor and fear governed lives, these deaths were warnings carved in flesh. No tombstones were raised for these souls, no songs sung. Yet their stories linger in the silence between stones, in the shadowed corners of the Colosseum, where cruelty once danced in daylight. In its early years, before the Hypogeum was built, the Colosseum held wonders now almost impossible to imagine. Naumachia, or mock naval battles, where the arena floor was flooded and ships clashed in choreographed war. Engineers diverted water from aqueducts, sealed the ground with pitch and concrete and created shallow lakes where prisoners, dressed as sailors, rode into battle under painted skies. The audience, seated high above, watched miniature wars play out: Egyptians versus Greeks, Carthaginians versus Romans, recreations of history turned into blood-soaked theater. Later, as the arena's underground was developed, such floods ceased, but the drama continued in other forms: elaborate mythological reenactments, where gods descended from cranes, heroes fought beasts, and temples rose on hidden platforms. Men were cast as Hercules, Perseus, or Theseus, their victories or deaths staged for effect, echoing the divine favor and heroic ideals Rome held dear. For the Colosseum was not only a place of death, it was a place of storytelling, where history, myth, and propaganda merged into one breathless display. And though the illusions are gone and the water has long since dried, the memory of those staged seas and vanished gods still lingers in the stone. To enter the Colosseum was to step into a world carefully ordered, where every seat reflected your place in society. Seating was stratified, from the marble-fronted rings reserved for senators and nobles to the upper wooden bleachers, where women, slaves, and the poor crowded together. The emperor sat in a gilded box, flanked by guards, while priests and vestals held honored positions, their white robes gleaming under sunlight. The Roman people came dressed in finery or rags, clutching bread and fruit, whispering wagers and gossip as they settled in. Tickets were marked with gate numbers and stairs, allowing smooth access through the vonatoria, corridors designed for swift movement. Vendors walked the aisles, selling wine, olives, and honeyed nuts. Sometimes games lasted all day, with music, drums, and the cries of hawkers weaving a constant rhythm. Cheers rose like thunder, boos fell like rain. And the cries of hawkers weaving a constant rhythm. Cheers rose like thunder, boos fell like rain, and chants echoed into the sky. But amid the noise, the Colosseum was a mirror of status, of control, of who belonged where and why. It reminded every Roman of their place, of the power they served, and the spectacle that bound them together as one. Empire made flesh, stone, and sound. It was more than entertainment. It was governance in disguise. To truly understand the Colosseum is to understand the Roman genius for spectacle as control, for turning blood into policy and drama into obedience. The phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, was no accident. It captured the imperial logic of distraction, of providing just enough food and spectacle to keep the population passive and loyal. Emperors knew that 50,000 citizens cheering in the arena were less likely to riot in the streets, less likely to question the taxes, wars, or the man on the throne. The Colosseum was a stage where political power became visible, where Rome's strength was not whispered, but shouted, sung, displayed with lions, thunder, and triumph. When victories were won in distant lands, they were reenacted here. When enemies were crushed, their defeat was paraded before the Roman eyes. And between every fight, every game, was a message. Rome is strong, Rome is eternal, Rome provides. The Colosseum was the empire's mirror, its theater, its propaganda machine, ensuring loyalty not through law alone, but through awe, through carefully choreographed violence, through the sweet illusion that Rome cared for its people. And so, stone by stone, it became a tool of empire as much as a monument of wonder. From its very foundations, the Colosseum was tied to emperors, not only as builders, but as performers in their own right. It began with Vespasian and Titus, who saw the arena as a way to rewrite Rome's past and celebrate its future. But over time, the games became personal stages for rulers who craved more than approval. They wanted adoration, fear, and control. Domitian used the Colosseum to enforce imperial cult rituals, staging games in honor of divine ancestors. Trajan, after defeating the Dacians, hosted games that lasted months, with thousands of gladiators and animals, a flood of blood to match a flood of victory. And then came Commodus, the emperor who stepped beyond audience and into the sand, fighting as a gladiator before the stunned eyes of the elite. Dressed as Hercules, he fought with theatrical flair, slaying animals, striking poses, demanding applause, not for Rome, but for himself. The Colosseum became his mirror, reflecting his madness back to the people. Emperors were not just rulers, they were performers, symbols, and gods of flesh, using the arena to command attention, project strength, and shape the soul of Rome. And through their games, they became legend, or monster, etched forever in the memory of stone. Though the Colosseum was built for the Roman citizen, its stone embraced people from all walks of life: women, children, foreigners, and slaves, each finding their place in the vast tiered world of seats. Roman women could attend the games, especially during holidays, but were relegated to the uppermost rows, peering down like distant gods on the scene below. Were drawn into the Colosseum's rhythm. It was one of the few places in Rome where society came together, unequally, but together, bound by spectacle, by emotion, by the fierce pulse of life and death unfolding before their eyes. Not all who came to the Colosseum came for blood. Some came for thought. Poets, philosophers, and critics of Roman life sat in quiet corners, watching not with cheers, but with pens and silence. Seneca, though long dead before the Colosseum was finished, warned of the moral rot of watching death for sport. Juvenal, the sharp satirist, mocked the mindless hunger for bread and circuses and the emptiness of imperial grandeur. Others, like Martial, praised the Colosseum's wonders, its engineering, its performances, its ability to stun. To many artists, the arena was a paradox, beauty built for brutality, art made of pain. They wrote of the elegance of the arches, the perfect sweep of seating, the brilliance of the spectacles, but always they questioned, what does it mean to cheer for death? What does it say of Rome, of ourselves? The Colosseum inspired not only awe, but unease, a mirror that showed not just glory, but humanity's darker hunger. And in their poems, letters, and graffiti, scratched onto stone walls, these voices remain, whispering even now, reminding us that behind the spectacle was always a question: what price do we pay to be entertained? As gods watched from statues and incense curled through the city, the Colosseum played its own part in Rome's spiritual evolution. In its early days, the arena was sacred to pagan gods. Games were held in honor of Jupiter, Mars, Diana, and ancestral spirits. Before great contests, sacrifices were offered, and victory seen as a gift from above. But as the empire aged, a new force rose: Christianity, quiet at first, then growing with urgency and defiance. Early Christians viewed the games as cruel and idolatrous, a symbol of Rome's sin. Some, like Tertullian, condemned the arena entirely, while others, like Ignatius and Perpetua, may have died within its walls. Legends, though uncertain, speak of Christian martyrs torn by beasts, singing even as they fell, and of crosses raised in secret beneath the sands. In time, the Colosseum's spiritual center shifted from a place of divine celebration to one of mourning, memory, and transformation. Centuries later, Christian leaders would declare it a holy site and build crosses within its ruins. The gods of Rome fell silent, but the echoes of prayer remained, whispered now in softer tones, no longer demanding sacrifice, but offering forgiveness in a place once filled with blood. Even the greatest monuments crumble, not in thunder, but in silence, over centuries. After nearly 400 years of roaring crowds, spilled blood, and imperial presence, the Colosseum began to fade, not all at once, but piece by piece. As Rome's political heart shifted to Constantinople, as invaders breached the city's walls and the Western Empire withered, the games ceased. The last recorded gladiator fight was in the 5th century, the final animal hunts in the early 6th. What followed was not a cataclysm, but a long, slow forgetting. In 847, an earthquake shattered the southern wall. Others followed, weakening arches and dislodging stones. Fires broke out, rain seeped into cracks, vegetation crept along forgotten paths. Locals scavenged marble and iron for new buildings. The stones of palaces, churches, even parts of the Vatican were born from the bones of the Colosseum. It stood half alive, wounded but tall, its silhouette jagged, its corridors filled with silence. The crowds were gone, but the structure endured, not as monument, but as quarry, as ruin, as a relic waiting for memory to return. And in the wind that blew through broken arches, the ghosts of old applause sometimes seemed to stir. In the Middle Ages, the Colosseum changed faces once more. It became a fortress, a shelter, a strange blend of sacred and savage. As power fractured in Rome, noble families, most famously the Frangipani, seized the arena and turned it into a castle, raising wooden towers, sealing entrances, and defending it like a stronghold. By day, goats grazed its lower chambers. By night, thieves lurked in the shadows. It was feared, respected, and slowly reimagined. Pilgrims came, whispering tales that the Colosseum had once been a temple of martyrs, a place where early Christians had bled for their faith. While historically unclear, the belief grew strong enough that Pope Gregory the Great held prayers in its shadow, and monks carved crosses into old stone. It became a sacred ruin, a place where time seemed still, where memory clung to walls like ivy, but it was also a place of poverty, home to squatters and desperate souls seeking shelter among the ghosts. The grandeur was gone, but the Colosseum endured as a vessel for stories, for faith, for survival. No longer the stage of Rome, it was now her haunted shell. The Renaissance was a rebirth, not just of art, but of memory, and among its greatest obsessions were the ruins of Rome, chief among them the Colosseum. Artists, poets, and architects wandered its corridors with sketchbooks and awe, rediscovering the harmony of its arches, the elegance of its vaults. Men like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo studied its proportions, inspired by its balance and mystery. Yet, even as wonder returned, destruction continued. Popes and princes still stripped stone from its walls, recycling its grandeur into basilicas and palazzos, believing that the dead empire could fuel the new one. It was a paradox, admired and dismantled, drawn and plundered, but among the ruins bloomed reverence. The Colosseum appeared in paintings, poems, and treatises as a symbol of ancient wisdom and the fleetingness of human pride. To the Renaissance mind, it was no longer just a building. It was a lesson in stone, a bridge to a past that could teach the future. And though pieces were lost, what remained gained a new power, not as arena, but as idea, as myth reborn in ink and marble. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Colosseum had become a place of dreams and poetry, a ruin wrapped in ivy and moonlight, drawing travelers on the grand tour like moths to flame. Artists painted it in watercolor hues, poets wrote sonnets to its sorrow, lovers wandered beneath its arches, whispering lines from Byron, Shelley, and Goethe. It was no longer a place of blood, but of beauty, crumbling, majestic, eternal. Romanticism transformed the Colosseum into a symbol of mortality and time's gentle cruelty, a place where civilization once roared, now fallen silent beneath the stars. They said flowers grew where blood once spilled, that the walls wept with memory. Some tourists took relics, small stones, faded coins, while others simply stood and wept, overwhelmed by the gravity of history. Painters filled galleries with its haunting form, and poets etched its name into immortality. To the Romantics, the Colosseum was the heart of all ruins, the place where empires spoke not through victory, but through silence. And so long after the empire's dust had settled, its broken crown remained, wrapped in vines and dreams. In the modern era, the Colosseum was no longer a forgotten ruin. It became a puzzle to be solved, a monument to be protected. The rise of archaeology in the 19th and 20th centuries brought new life to old stones. Layers of earth were cleared, the hypogeum was unearthed, and for the first time in centuries, people saw the hidden gears beneath the ancient stage. Scholars traced the layout of seats, cataloged graffiti, and studied every layer of construction to understand not just what the Colosseum was, but how it was made, who made it, and why it lasted. Restorations began, preserving crumbling walls, stabilizing arches, and replacing lost sections with careful precision. Floodlights were added, turning the nighttime ruins into glowing monuments. Walkways were rebuilt, allowing people to stand where emperors once sat. The Colosseum was reborn, not as a place of games, but as a treasure of memory. Now, school children visit with wide eyes, archaeologists dig with reverent hands, and historians piece together the whispers of the past. The Colosseum became not just a relic, but a classroom, a museum, a symbol of Rome's enduring legacy. Its stones, once echoing with death, now speak of knowledge, resilience, and the power of remembering. The Colosseum, once a vast arena of spectacle and sacrifice, has transformed over millennia into one of the world's most powerful symbols, not only of Rome, but of history itself. In the 20th century, it became a symbol of Italy's unification, national pride, and cultural heritage. Artists, writers, and politicians invoked its image as the heart of the eternal city, a bridge between past and present. During Mussolini's rule, it was exploited as a backdrop for fascist propaganda, a reminder of imperial power, even as parts were threatened by neglect and pollution. But beyond politics, the Colosseum stands today as a monument to endurance, a place where millions come to marvel not at death, but at survival, at human creativity, resilience, and the passage of time. Illuminated by floodlights, it glows nightly as a beacon of history, inviting us to remember that beneath its stones lie stories of glory and pain, ambition and humility. The Colosseum reminds us that no empire is forever, but memory can be. The 20th century brought new trials, bombing during World War II, pollution but the spirit of preservation grew stronger still. Restoration projects from the 1930s onward worked tirelessly to stabilize the structure, repair damaged arches, and prevent further decay. International cooperation, archaeological advances, and public awareness transformed the Colosseum into one of the best preserved ancient monuments in the world. Cranes and scaffolds rose alongside tourists and school groups, united in a common cause to protect this link to the past for future generations. Each restoration was a labor of love, a battle against entropy, a commitment to history itself. And though scars remain, they are part of the story, proof that the Colosseum is not frozen in time, but a living monument, constantly cared for, respected, and renewed. Today, the Colosseum is among the most visited landmarks on Earth, welcoming over 7 million visitors each year. It is a global icon, its image reproduced in art, film, and media as the symbol of Rome's grandeur and complexity. Tourism brings life and money, but also challenges, balancing preservation with access, protecting ancient stones from modern wear, and managing the crowds that flood its arches. Carefully designed pathways, digital guides, and visitor centers help manage the flow, while ongoing education programs invite people to understand not just the spectacle, but the history behind it. From school groups to international travelers, the Colosseum is a classroom, a museum, and a shared heritage site. It inspires not only awe, but reflection on power, mortality, and the human story. The stones speak still, not with blood, but with voices of millions who come seeking connection. The Colosseum has transcended its origins, becoming a place where the past and present meet, where stories old and new intertwine, and where the world is reminded that history is alive and ours to protect. Looking ahead, the Colosseum faces new questions: how to preserve a fragile ancient giant in a rapidly changing world. Climate change, pollution, and urban growth threaten its stones. Balancing public access with conservation grows ever more complex. Yet hope and innovation also shine. Scientists use laser scanning, 3D modeling, and non-invasive techniques to monitor and protect. Global organizations unite to fund restorations and share knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, the Colosseum continues to inspire dialogue about history's meaning, about empire, violence, culture, and survival. It challenges us to remember the lessons etched in its walls, the cost of power, the fleetingness of glory, and the resilience of memory. As it stands today, glowing beneath the Roman sky, the Colosseum is both monument and mirror, a place where past and future meet, where stories are kept alive, and where humanity's shared heritage is honored. Its arches will continue to stand, not just as ruins, but as living symbols of endurance and hope for generations yet to come. And so, as we close our journey, we return to the beginning, standing once more beneath the arches, feeling the weight of centuries pressing gently on the soul. The Colosseum is more than stone and sand. It is a testament to humanity's dreams and follies, to the power of story, and to the passage of time. It tells us that empires rise and fall, but memory can endure. It whispers that life is fragile and fierce, beautiful and brutal, that the human spirit can build wonders, but must also reckon with what those wonders cost. The Colosseum invites us to listen to the roar, the silence, the ghosts, and the hope. It is a monument to the past, a classroom for the present, and a beacon for the future. And as the sun sets behind the Roman hills, bathing the ancient stones in gold, we are reminded, here, in this circle of stone and memory, we find the eternal echo of Rome.